The Holloway Ranch came into view around noon, and the sight of it made the hair on Rex's neck bristle. A low, silent growl rumbled in the dog's chest. Elias Vance knew broken places. He'd seen them in dusty, far-off countries. This ranch was another kind of broken. He was tired, a deep weariness that sleep couldn't touch. He'd come to buy a specific blue roan stallion, a simple transaction. He never imagined it would be the day his life split into a before and an after. The main house slumped in on itself, its wood gray and brittle. Dust caked the windows. The barn leaned heavily to one side. A few scrawny chickens pecked at the dirt. A hound dog lay near a water trough, too lazy to lift its head. There were no children's toys, no wash on the line. The silence was wrong. It was a held breath. A man emerged from the house. He was thick-bodied, with a red, sweaty face. His smile was thin and fake. "You Vance," he called out, his voice too loud. "I am," Elias replied, his voice level. His eyes kept moving, assessing. Rex stood tense at his side. "You're here for the roan." "That's right. He's in the barn." The man, Holloway, jerked a thumb toward the leaning structure. His tone was slick, like oil on water. Elias nodded once. He got off his horse, keeping the reins in his hand. "Stay," he murmured to Rex. The dog sat, but his body was a coiled spring. Elias started toward the barn, his boots silent in the thick dust. The yard was unnervingly still. He pushed the heavy barn door open. The coppery tang of blood hit him first. Then he saw her. His feet froze to the spot. He didn't even look at the horse. A woman was curled on her side near a pile of old tack. Her wrists were bound by a thick, rusted chain bolted to the wall. Her clothes were torn rags, caked in dirt. Her skin was a canvas of brutality, bruises in sickening shades of purple, yellow, and green. A fresh scab split her cheek. One eye was swollen shut. She was alive. He could see the slight, painful rise and fall of her ribs. She sensed him and lifted her head slowly. Her one good eye, a startling pale blue, found his. There was no plea in it, no hope, just a bottomless, exhausted terror. Elias Vance, a man who had faced down enemy fire without flinching, felt his blood turn to ice. Elias's training kicked in, compartmentalizing the shock, converting it into action. He moved toward the woman, his steps deliberate and quiet, the way he would approach a wounded comrade in a hostile zone. He knelt, his shadow falling over her. She flinched, a full-body tremor that was more heartbreaking than any scream. The rusted chain links scraped against the stone floor as he examined them. Rex, who had silently padded into the barn behind him, let out a soft whine, sensing the profound distress. "Easy now," Elias murmured, his voice low and steady, a tone he used to calm spooked horses. "I'm not going to hurt you." His eyes scanned the chains. They were old, heavy, and the bolt securing them to the wall was crusted with a dark, flaky substance he didn't want to identify. His hand hovered near her wrist, not touching, just assessing. The skin around the metal was raw and infected. "You're hurt bad," he said, more to himself than to her. She remained silent, her one good eye fixed on him with a mixture of fear and a faint, dying ember of defiance. Behind him, a floorboard creaked. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense silence. Rex spun around, a deep, warning growl erupting from his chest. Elias rose to his feet and turned, his body positioning itself between the woman and the doorway. Jed Holloway stood there, the afternoon light framing his bulky silhouette. He looked from Elias to the woman and back, his red face tightening with annoyance. "She's wild," he said, as if explaining a faulty piece of equipment. "Had to chain her. She's my property now." He took a step forward, but Rex's growl intensified, stopping him in his tracks. Elias's voice was dangerously quiet. "She bit my boy Levi clean through the hand," Holloway continued, undeterred. "Got the devil in her, I tell you." He tried a conspiratorial smile that didn't reach his eyes. You got papers on her, too, if you want. For a price. The words hung in the foul air of the barn. Papers. A price. Elias felt a cold fury settle in his gut, a feeling far more focused and deadly than mere anger. This wasn't just neglect. It was commerce in human suffering. I'm here to buy a horse, Elias said, each word a chip of ice. Not a person. Holloway's face flushed a deeper red. That ain't what this is. Hell, I saved her. She's my property now.
At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please share and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words.
The word property was the trigger. Elias took one step forward, his movement fluid and swift. Holloway's hand twitched, darting toward the revolver on his hip. But Elias was faster. He'd seen the intention in the man's eyes a fraction of a second before the movement began. His fist, hardened by years of labor and combat, snapped forward and connected with Holloway's jaw with a sickening crack. The man grunted, his eyes rolling back as he stumbled backward through the barn door and landed hard in the dirt outside, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Elias didn't spare him another glance. The threat was neutralized. His mission was now singular. He turned back to the woman. Her good eye was wide, fixed on him, the defiance now mixed with a flicker of stunned hope. I'm going to get you loose, he said, his voice returning to that gentle, steady tone. He drew the heavy hunting knife from his belt. She flinched at the sight of the blade, but she didn't pull away as he set to work on the bolt. Rex stood guard over the downed man outside, a low, continuous rumble in his throat ensuring he stay down. The metal was stubborn, rust welded to the wall. Elias worked the knife's point into the seam, leveraging it with a fierce, controlled pressure. With a final grating screech, the bolt gave way, and the chains fell loose. She didn't move, as if the sensation of freedom was too foreign to comprehend. It's okay, Elias said softly. Can you stand? She tried to push herself up, but her arms buckled instantly, a sharp gasp of pain escaping her lips. Without another word, Elias slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as carefully as he would fragile china. She weighed nothing. It was like carrying a ghost. A wave of protective fury, so potent it stole his breath, washed over him. He carried her out of the barn, past the groaning form of Jed Holloway, past the beautiful blue roan he had come to buy. Ash, his Grullo mare, stood patiently. Rex fell into step beside them. Elias didn't have a plan, only an imperative. Get her away from here. He set the woman gently in the saddle, then swung up behind her, holding her securely against his chest with one arm while taking the reins with the other. She was trembling uncontrollably, a silent, seismic shivering that he felt deep in his own bones. He clicked his tongue, and Ash moved out. Rex trotted ahead, scouting the trail. Elias rode away from the Holloway place without a single look back. The woman didn't speak. He didn't ask her name. Some things were too sacred for words, and some wounds were too fresh to be probed. Names could come later, when they were earned again, when they belonged to the person and not the pain. Elias pushed Ash into a steady, distance eating trot, putting as many miles as possible between them and the Holloway ranch. He didn't look back, but every sense was on high alert, his ears straining for the sound of a pursuing horse, his eyes scanning the rocky outcrops and dry washes for any sign of movement. Rex ranged ahead, a sleek, gray shadow pausing on ridges to sniff the air. The woman remained rigid in front of him. She held herself so still it was painful to watch, as if any movement might shatter her. Her trembling had subsided into an occasional, deep shiver that ran through her like an electrical current. She didn't lean against him. She was a bowed piece of wood, bearing the weight of her own body against the rhythm of the horse. He could feel the sharp protrusion of her shoulder blades against his chest. They rode into hard, beautiful country. They moved from the scrubland around the Holloway place into higher country, where juniper and pinyon pine dotted the hillsides. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in washes of orange and purple. Elias knew this land could be both sanctuary and trap, and right now, he needed it to be the former. After 2 hours of hard riding, he guided Ash down into a shallow, hidden creek bed where a few cottonwoods offered meager shade and the gurgle of water masked their sounds. It was a defensible position with good sight lines. This was where they would stop. "Easy, girl," he murmured to Ash, reining her in. He dismounted first, his boots crunching on the gravelly sand. He turned and looked up at the woman. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still gripping the saddle horn, her knuckles white. Her one good eye was fixed on some distant, invisible point. "I'm going to help you down," he said, his voice low. He reached up and placed his hands on her waist. She flinched violently, a gasp catching in her throat. But as he lifted her, she didn't fight. He set her on her feet, but her legs immediately buckled like a newborn foal's. He caught her before she fell, holding her upright until she found a shaky equilibrium. Rex approached slowly, sniffing the air around her, then sat a few feet away, watching her with an unnerving, intelligent stillness. Elias led her to a relatively soft patch of ground beneath a tree, and she sank down, drawing her knees to her chest. He worked quickly and efficiently, a soldier making camp. He unsaddled Ash, rubbed her down, and staked her where she could graze and drink. He built a small, efficient fire pit with rocks, just large enough to heat a meal. From his saddlebags, he pulled a bedroll and laid it out near the woman, then a canteen of water. He uncorked the canteen and held it out to her. She stared at it as if it were a foreign object. Her cracked, swollen lips parted slightly. "Go on," he said gently. "It's just water." Slowly, as if moving through mud, she reached out a trembling hand and took it. She brought it to her lips and drank, at first in small sips, then in desperate, choking gulps. Water trickled down her chin, cutting clean lines through the grime. She drank until it was half gone, then handed it back to him, her breath coming in ragged pants. Next, he retrieved a dented tin pot, a sack of beans, and a piece of salt pork. He cooked the meal in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire, the creak, and the wind in the cottonwoods. The smell of food filled the small camp. When it was ready, he scooped a portion into a tin bowl and placed it on the ground beside her, near enough to reach, but far enough to give her space. Then he turned his back, pretending to check on Ash, giving her the privacy to eat without being watched. He heard the soft scrape of the bowl after a long moment. He didn't turn around, but he listened to the slow, careful sounds of her eating. It was the sound of someone for whom every swallow was an effort, both physical and psychological. She ate it all, every single bean. It was the most positive sign he'd seen yet. Night fell with a sudden desert cold. Elias added a few more pieces of wood to the fire. He sat on the other side of the flames, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. Rex lay between them, his head on his paws, his eyes shifting from Elias to the woman and back. She didn't sleep. He could see her silhouette against the firelight, her knees still drawn up, her head turning at every nocturnal sound, the cry of a coyote, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the brush. Her fear was a living thing in the camp. Elias pretended to sleep, but he remained as vigilant as his dog. He watched her through slitted eyes, saw the way she stared into the darkness, her body tense, waiting for the chains to reappear. He knew then, with a cold certainty, that the danger was far from over. Jed Holloway was just one man. The real enemy was the memory of what he had done, and that enemy had followed them right into this creek bed. The dawn broke cold and clear. Elias had not slept, and neither had the woman. As the first rays of sun touched the creek bed, he saw her uncurl her body, moving with the stiffness of deep, persistent pain. He wordlessly reheated the leftover beans and placed another bowl near her. This time, her hand darted out more quickly, and she ate with less hesitation, though still with a furtive, animal-like wariness. They rode again that day and the next. Elias set a punishing pace. The landscape began to change, the flat, arid plains giving way to rolling hills studded with juniper and cedar. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine. On the third day, a small miracle occurred. As Elias helped her down from the saddle for their midday rest, she managed to stand on her own for a full minute before her legs quivered and she had to lean against Ash. She looked at her own feet, then at Elias, a flicker of surprise in her good eye. On the fourth day, as he handed her a strip of dried venison, she did not flinch from his approaching hand. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and she didn't immediately pull away. Rex, perceptive as always, began to walk closer to her during their rests, sometimes lying near enough that his fur almost touched her leg. The fifth day was the turning point. They had made camp in a high meadow where the stars were a brilliant, dusted blanket overhead. The fire was low, and the world was quiet except for the soft sounds of the horses and the wind. Elias was cleaning his knife when a sound, rough and cracked from disuse, cut through the silence. Anna. He froze, his hand stilling. He looked up slowly. She was staring at him, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight. Her one good eye was clear and focused directly on him. As she said Anna, her breath misted in the cold night air, the first visible sign of her life returning. "My name," she rasped, the words scraping out of her throat like stones. "It's Anna." Elias held her gaze and gave a single, slow nod. It was all the acknowledgement she needed. She looked down at her hands, as if surprised they had obeyed her. She had reclaimed the first piece of herself. The next morning, Anna saddled the blue roan stallion herself. Her movements were slow, her arms shaking with the effort, but she did it without assistance. When Elias approached to check the cinch, she shook her head once, a sharp, decisive motion. He respected it, stepping back. Later that day, as they rode side by side, the silence between them felt different. Less heavy, more contemplative. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice still rough but stronger. "My land," Elias replied, gesturing north. "Past Cedar Ridge. It's remote, quiet. No one comes out there unless they've got a reason." She was silent for a long moment, processing this. Then came the question he knew had been burning inside her. "Why are you doing this?" "Helping me." Elias stared at the horizon, at the dark line of the ridge that was now their destination. "A man who stands by and lets an evil thing happen is already dead inside," he said, his voice low and firm. "He just doesn't know it yet." Anna didn't reply, but the next morning, she was up before him, already watering the horses. By dusk, they crested a final rise, and Elias's homestead lay spread out below them. It was a small, solid cabin of lodgepole pine with a stone chimney, a corral, a sturdy barn, all tucked into a fold of land beneath a towering ridge. "It's not much," Elias said, a rare, almost defensive note in his voice. Anna looked at it for a long time, her expression unreadable. "It has 4 walls and a door," she said quietly. "That's a lot." He showed her the spare room, a small, square space with a cot, a wool blanket, and a single window looking out toward the ridge. She stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, just staring inside. Finally, she stepped over the threshold. She did not emerge for 2 days. For 2 days, the cabin was utterly silent except for the sounds Elias made, the crackle of a fire, the scrape of a chair, the soft clink of him cleaning his gear. Rex would often lie outside the closed door to the spare room, his head cocked, listening. Sometimes Elias would hear the dog's tail give a single soft thump against the floorboards, as if in response to some sound too quiet for human ears. She was alive in there. She was breathing. For now, that was enough. He didn't disturb her. He left a plate of food and a canteen by the door, and he'd find them empty hours later, the plate licked clean. On the morning of the third day, the door creaked open. Elias, who was mending a harness by the fireplace, didn't look up immediately. He heard the soft shuffle of her feet on the wooden floor. Out of a corner of his eye, he saw her. She was wrapped in the wool blanket from her cot, her hair damp from the pitcher of water he'd left in her room. She looked fragile, ethereal, like a ghost haunting her own body. But she was upright, and she was looking around the main room of the cabin as if seeing it for the first time. Her eyes, both open now though one was still discolored, took in the simple table, the stone hearth, the rifles mounted on the wall, the neat stacks of supplies. They were cataloging, assessing, looking for threats, for exits, for the rules of this new world. "Coffee's hot," Elias said, his voice deliberately casual. He gestured with his chin toward the pot hanging in the fireplace. She didn't speak, but after a long moment, she shuffled to the table and sat down slowly, wincing as her bruised body met the hard chair. He poured a tin cup of the strong, black brew and set it in front of her. Her fingers, when she wrapped them around the coffee cup, were still raw and red around the nails. She stared at the steaming liquid, then wrapped her hands around the cup, absorbing its warmth. She didn't drink it. She just held on, as if it were an anchor to the present. Later that day, he went out to chop wood. When he returned, arms full of split pine, he stopped in the doorway. Anna was standing by the sink, washing the tin plate and cup from her breakfast. Her movements were slow, deliberate, her arms trembling with the weak effort. She was contributing. It was a silent, powerful statement. I am not just a thing to be cared for. I am here. This became their new, unspoken routine. She would sleep long hours, but when she was awake, she would tentatively engage with the life of the homestead. She started with small, indoor tasks. Then, one afternoon, Elias saw her from the corral, standing at the edge of the garden plot, just staring at the unturned earth. The next day, she was there with a hand trowel, slowly, painstakingly clearing weeds from a small, square patch. Rex became her shadow. Where Anna went, the dog was never far behind. He didn't fawn over her. He simply existed in her space, a large, warm, living presence. One evening, Elias saw her sitting on the porch, her hand resting absently on the dog's head as she stared out at the darkening ridge. It was the first time he'd seen her initiate contact without flinching. She spoke little. Elias didn't push. He answered her sporadic questions about the plants, the animals, the weather with simple, direct answers. They were two quiet people building a fragile peace, word by word, chore by chore. Then one morning it ended. Elias woke at first light as always. He stepped outside to check the perimeter, a habit as ingrained as breathing. He saw it immediately. The corral gate was open. The blue roan stallion was gone. And so was Anna. His heart didn't sink with anger. It clenched with a cold, sharp fear. She hadn't just left. Her tracks didn't lead back down the mountain toward civilization. They led east, toward the Holloway place. Elias didn't hesitate. He saddled Ash in under a minute, his movements swift and precise. Rex circled anxiously, sensing the shift in his master's energy. The fear Elias felt wasn't that she had abandoned his protection. It was a colder, sharper dread that she was walking straight back into the lion's den alone. He took off at a gallop, Rex loping effortlessly ahead. The roan's tracks were clear in the damp morning earth, leading not down the mountain toward town, but east, across the rugged, open country. She was riding hard, but Ash was fresh and knew this land. Elias pushed her, his eyes scanning the horizon, his mind racing. What was her plan? Revenge? A final confrontation? He found her less than 2 hours later, much closer to the Holloway place than he'd expected. She wasn't at the ranch itself. She was crouched in a thicket of scrub oak on a low rise overlooking the dilapidated homestead, the roan tied loosely behind her. She wasn't preparing to charge in. She was watching. Elias dismounted and moved up behind her with the silence born of a lifetime in a field. He made no sound, but she knew he was there. She didn't turn. I didn't come to go back, she said, her voice low and steady, her gaze fixed on the house below. The silence there was as profound as it had been the first time. No smoke from the chimney. No movement in the yard. Then why? Elias asked, coming to stand beside her, following her line of sight. I came to see if he's still breathing, she whispered, the words hanging in the cold air. I thought to know if he'd die on his own. Elias's voice was even. You think to finish him? Her jaw tightened. She stared at the silent, dead-looking house. I can't live. I can't breathe, she corrected, knowing he might still be drawing air out there, that he might be looking at this same sky. Elias didn't try to stop her. He understood that some ghosts couldn't be outrun. They had to be faced. Then let's go see, he said. They walked down the slope together, leading the horses, Rex flanking them silently. The yard was even more desolate than before. The front door of a house hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. The air that wafted out was thick with a smell of rot and unwashed bodies. Inside, the scene was one of squalor. Empty bottles littered the floor. A table was overturned. And in a corner, curled on a filthy mattress, was a boy. He was maybe 15, skinny and pale, clutching a blood-caked rag to his stomach. He looked up as they entered, his eyes widening in shock and fear. You came back, he rasped, his voice weak. Anna froze in the doorway, her body rigid. Elias stepped slightly in front of her, his hand resting near the knife on his belt. Where is he? Elias asked, his voice cutting through the foul air. The boy coughed, a wet, painful sound. Gone. Took the wagon south 2 days ago. Said he'd be back with men. Said you'd regret getting loose. His eyes, full of a strange, hardened resentment, shifted to Anna. Said he'd make it worse next time. Anna took a step forward, her calm terrifying. I'm not here for you. The boy's face twisted. I held the chain, the boy spat. I enjoyed it. The words landed like a physical blow. Anna's fingers twitched near her side, where Elias knew she now carried a small skinning knife he'd given her for chores. Her breathing became shallow, ragged. The memory of the pain, the humiliation, the absolute powerlessness was right here in this room, staring at her from a sick boy's face. Elias moved between them, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. Enough. Anna stared at the boy for a long, suspended moment. Her body was a bowstring pulled taut. Then something shifted. Her hand loosened. The fire in her eyes didn't die, but it cooled, solidified into something harder and more final than anger. It was dismissal. He was beneath her. She turned and walked out of the house without another word. They left him there in the silence and the filth, his fate already sealed by his own choices. The ride back to the homestead was made in a silence thicker than the one they'd shared before. Anna sat straighter in the saddle, her back rigid, her eyes seeing nothing of the landscape around them. She was trapped in the memory of the boy's words. I held the chain. I enjoyed it. That night, back within the cabin's sturdy walls, Elias built up the fire, while Anna scrubbed her hands and arms in a basin of water with a ferocity that was unsettling. She scoured her skin until it was raw and red. Elias waited outside on the porch, listening to the splash of water and her quick, sharp breaths. Rex whined softly, nudging his master's hand. When she finally stepped out, her hair damp and skin flushed, she didn't look at him. She stared into the darkness beyond the firelight, her arms wrapped around herself. I'm not afraid of him, she stated, her voice flat and certain. Not of Jed, not of that boy. Elias nodded, poking the fire with a stick. I know. She turned her head, and the firelight caught in her eyes, which were no longer clouded with pain, but sharp and clear as broken glass. But I need to know how to make them afraid of me. Elias met her gaze, seeing the resolve solidifying there. It was steady, controlled, and dangerous. This wasn't a plea. It was a declaration. He gave a single, curt nod. Then we start tomorrow. The next morning, before the sun had crested the ridge, they began. There was no discussion, no warm-up. Elias handed her his spare rifle, a Winchester that was heavy and unforgiving. This isn't a tool for hunting game, he said, his voice all business. It's for ending threats. You respect it, or it will hurt you. He taught her how to hold it, how to brace the stock firmly against her shoulder so the recoil wouldn't savage her bruised body. She listened, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her first shot was wild, the kick knocking her back a step. She didn't complain. She just reloaded, her movements clumsy but determined, and fired again. She learned fast. Within days, her stance was solid, her breathing controlled. She learned to lead a target, to adjust for wind, to make every shot count. "You miss your shot," Elias said, watching her reload with new efficiency. "You better be ready to follow with something sharper." She just nodded, raised the rifle, and fired, hitting a pine not 50 yards away dead center. They moved on to knives. Close quarters work. Elias taught her footwork, how to use her smaller size and speed to her advantage, how to put the weight of her body behind a thrust. She was a quick study, her movements becoming fluid and precise. There was no fear in her eyes during these lessons, only a cold, focused intensity. But Elias knew skill wasn't enough. He taught her the land itself had to become a weapon. They set traps around the perimeter of a homestead, snares, tripwires connected to fallen logs, a false board on the porch that would drop weighted nails. He made her reset each one blindfolded, until she knew the mechanics by touch alone. "Know your ground better than the men who want to take it," he told her. She repeated the lesson under her breath as she worked. My ground. At night, she would sit by the fire, knees pulled to her chest, lost in thought. Elias didn't push. But one night, her voice, calm and distant, cut the silence. "He thought breaking me was a kind of keeping," she said, staring into the flames. "Like trapping a bird till it forgets the sky exists." Elias spat into the fire. "He won't be thinking anything when you're done." She didn't smile, but the hard line of her mouth softened just a fraction. The crisp morning air was shattered by the sound of a single horse approaching at a steady pace. Rex was on his feet instantly, a low growl building in his throat as he stared down the trail leading to the homestead. Elias, who was mending a fence post, set his tools down slowly and picked up his rifle, leaning it against the fence within easy reach. Anna, who had been drilling with her knife by the corral, didn't stop her movements, but her eyes flicked toward the sound, her body coiling with ready tension. The rider was a lean, raw-boned man on a tired-looking bay gelding. He reined in at the property's edge, his eyes sharp and calculating, taking in the cabin, the corral, Elias, and finally, Anna. A long, pale scar traced a path from his lip down to his jaw, giving his face a permanent sneer. His hand rested casually on his thigh, too close to his holstered revolver for comfort. "Name's Jarrow," the man called out, his voice carrying easily across the quiet yard. "I come from south of Choya Bend. Looking for a woman. Short hair, don't talk much. Rode off with a man that fits your look." His eyes lingered on Anna, who had now stopped her practice and stood perfectly still, the knife held loose and ready at her side. Elias didn't answer. He simply watched the man, his expression giving nothing away. Rex's growl deepened into a continuous, menacing rumble. Jarrow's smirk widened, the scar stretching. "My brother's been missing near a month now. Name's Jed. Last seen with a blue roan stallion and a busted jaw." His gaze slid back to Elias, challenging. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" It was then that Anna stepped forward. She didn't rush. She walked calmly from the corral into the center of the yard, placing herself fully in Jarrow's line of sight. The changes in her were stark under the morning sun. The bruises had faded to faint yellows and greens, the swelling gone from her face. But it was her eyes that held Jarrow. They were no longer windows to terror, but chips of flint. Jarrow's smirk died the moment he saw her clearly. The casual arrogance drained from his face, replaced by a flicker of shock and something uglier. "You," he breathed. Before he could form another word, Anna spoke, her voice flat and cold, carrying in the clear air. "Tell your brother I'll come find him." She paused, letting the weight of the promise settle. Not the other way around. Jarrow swallowed, the Adam's apple bobbing in his thin neck. The fear in his eyes was brief but unmistakable. This was not the broken creature he'd expected. This was something else entirely. Without another word, he yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal sharply, and kicked it into a gallop back down the trail, dust pluming behind him. Elias watched him disappear, then looked at Anna. She hadn't moved, her shoulders squared, watching the empty trail as if she could still see the ghost of Jero's fear hanging in the air. "That was a choice," Elias said, his tone neutral. "I made it," she replied, her gaze still fixed ahead. "You could have killed him," Elias noted. "It would have been a cleaner end. No loose ends." Anna finally turned her head, and the look in her eyes was more terrifying than any outburst of rage. "That would have been mercy," she said quietly. "He doesn't deserve mercy. He deserves to be afraid." Elias didn't argue. He understood the strategy. A dead man was a closed book. A frightened man was a messenger, and the message he would carry to his brother was more potent than any bullet. She is not afraid, and she is coming for you. The air in the days following Jero's visit was thick with anticipation. Elias and Anna worked with a grim, focused efficiency. They didn't speak of the coming conflict, but every action was a preparation for it. They dug shallow trenches in strategic approaches, lined a barn entrance with broken glass and old nails, and Anna practiced resetting her blindfolded traps until she could do it in under a minute. She now moved with a new kind of grace, a predator's economy of motion. The pistol Elias had given her sat low on her hip, a familiar, comfortable weight. 2 days after Jero's departure, they found the first sign. A trap near the river, one of the simple snares meant for small game, had been sprung. But it wasn't an animal caught in it. The dirt around it was churned up, and a dark, rusty stain blotched the earth. A few feet away, one of Elias's goats was missing, its tether cut cleanly. "He's testing us," Elias said, his voice low as he crouched by the stain. He pressed a finger into the dirt and sniffed it. Blood. Not much. He took the goat as a message. Anna crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the tree line, the riverbank, every shadow. "He wants us to chase, to run out into the open where he has the advantage." "We won't," Elias stated. "No," Anna agreed, her voice steady. "He'll come here." She looked back toward the cabin, her gaze sweeping over the defenses they had built. "He wants to prove he can take what's his. He wants to break me on my own ground." They redoubled their efforts. Elias taught her how to create deadfalls and how to use the landscape itself as a weapon, guiding potential attackers into kill zones. Anna, in turn, seemed to have an innate sense for deception, suggesting false trails and misleading signs. They were no longer just teacher and student. They were co-commanders, their minds sinking in a silent, tactical dance. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the ridge, casting long, distorted shadows, the signal came. Rex, who had been dozing by the porch, suddenly lifted his head. A low, vibrating growl started deep in his chest. He stood, his entire body rigid, staring fixedly at the eastern trail. Elias, who was oiling his rifle, looked up. Anna, who had been sharpening her knife, stilled her hand. They didn't need to speak. They both rose and moved to the porch. On the horizon, a thin plume of dust rose, then 3 more. Riders. And behind them, the lumbering shape of a wagon. Anna stepped forward to stand beside Elias, her posture calm, her breathing even. The pistol felt like an extension of her own hand. "They think I'm still afraid," she said, her voice barely a whisper, meant only for him. Elias looked at her profile, etched against the dying light. There was no tremor in her hands, no uncertainty in her stance. "Are you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The set of her shoulders, the cold fire in her eyes, was her reply. Fear was a luxury she had sold for the currency of revenge a long time ago. The riders slowed as they approached the property line, taking in the fortified cabin, the 2 figures waiting for them on the porch. Jero was at the front, a dirty bandage wrapped around his head. Beside him was a man Elias recognized even from a distance, Jed Holloway, his face a bloated, furious mask. Behind them were two rough-looking hired guns and the wagon, empty save for coils of rope and iron bars. They hadn't come to talk. They had come to take back their property. Dusk settled like a slow warning across the land. The four riders and the wagon came to a halt just beyond the property line. Jed Holloway, his face a mask of bloated fury, nudged his horse a step forward. His eyes locked onto Anna with a possessiveness that was more violation than a look. "We're here for the girl," Jed bellowed. "Hand her over, and maybe we leave you breathing." His hand rested on the pistol at his hip. Elias didn't move, his rifle held easy in his hands. Rex stood beside him, a statue of poised aggression. But it was Anna who moved. She stepped past Elias, off the porch, and into the open yard. She looked not at Jed, but at Jero, who flinched under her gaze. "Then come take me," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried, clear and sharp. Jed's cruel grin returned. He thought she was bluffing. He was wrong. His hand dropped toward his gun. He was too slow. A single, sharp crack split the evening air. It wasn't Elias's rifle. It was Anna's pistol. Jed's hat flew from his head, spinning into the dirt. The bullet had shaved a burning line across his temple. He screamed, more in shock and humiliation than pain, clutching his head. The two hired guns jerked in surprise. Before the first one could even clear leather, Elias's rifle spoke once. The man grunted, a spray of crimson misting the air from his throat. He toppled from his saddle. The second hired gun panicked. He dove from his horse, scrambling for cover behind the wagon. He didn't make it 3 steps. His boot came down on a patch of loose dirt. A spiked board snapped up from the ground with terrifying force. The man's scream was cut short as the iron teeth bit deep into his leg. He collapsed, writhing and shrieking in the dirt. Jed, clutching his bleeding head, stumbled behind the wagon. Jero, still mounted, looked on in horror. Anna walked toward them. Her steps were slow, steady, and utterly without hesitation. Elias moved behind her, his rifle covering the scene. But this was her storm, her reckoning. Jero fumbled for his pistol, his hand shaking. "You don't have the guts," he cried, his voice cracking. Her bullet hit his shoulder, spinning him from the saddle. He landed hard in the dirt, howling in pain, crawling in helpless circles. "You should have died in that barn," he gasped. Anna kept walking, her eyes never leaving him. "You held the chain," she said, her voice terrifyingly even. He tried to crawl backward. "I was following orders. It wasn't me. It wasn't my choice." Anna knelt beside him, the barrel of her pistol steady. "You enjoyed it," she stated. "That's what makes you worse." Jero sobbed, a pathetic, broken sound. He tried to form a plea. She fired once. His body sagged, still. Silence descended, heavy and abrupt. Anna stood over Jero's body, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She looked at her hands, at the pistol she held. They felt foreign. Elias moved to her side. "You done?" he asked. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the wagon wheels. "Not yet." From behind the wagon, a sound of scrambling. Jed Holloway burst from his hiding place. He wasn't trying to fight. He was running, stumbling, a panicked animal fleeing the slaughter. He made it 10 yards into the twilight. Anna didn't shout. She didn't run. She simply turned, raised her pistol, and took aim. Her breath stilled. The world narrowed to the sight at the end of the barrel and the stumbling form of the man who had tried to own her. The shot echoed, flat and final. Jed cried out, his leg buckling. He fell face first into the dirt, clutching his thigh. She hadn't killed him. She had maimed him. Elias watched, his rifle ready. He did not interfere. Anna walked toward the crawling, sobbing man. Each step was measured. She stopped a few feet from him. He rolled onto his back, his face a mess of blood and tears. "Please," he begged. "I saved you. I fed you. You'd be dead without me." Anna looked down at him. "You didn't save me," she said, her voice calm. "You just found a new cage." She raised the pistol again, her aim shifting from his leg to the center of his mass. His eyes widened in terror. He saw his death in her eyes. There was no mercy there. The gunshot was a period at the end of a long, horrific sentence. Anna stood over his body for a long moment. Then she slowly lowered her pistol. She turned and walked back toward Elias, her steps heavy now. The silence returned, but it was different. It was the silence of a storm that had passed. She stopped in front of him. "It's done," she said. Elias simply nodded. "For now." The silence after the gunshots was profound. The only sounds were the crackle of the dying fire and the weak moans from the man caught in the leg trap. Elias walked over to the trapped man, looked down at the ruin of his leg, and fired a single merciful shot. The moaning stopped. Anna stood where she had stopped, her pistol hanging loosely at her side. She was breathing deeply, but her body was beginning to tremble. She watched Elias, her expression hollow. "We need to bury them," Elias said, his voice rough. "Far from here." She just nodded, her jaw tight. They worked through the night. They loaded the 4 bodies onto the wagon the men had brought. Elias drove it miles away, to a barren stretch where nothing grew. Anna rode beside him, her silence a wall. They dug without speaking, the only sounds the scrape of their shovels and their labored breathing. Anna worked with a frenetic, desperate energy, driving the shovel into the hardpan as if she were digging through the layers of her own trauma. She didn't stop until the last body was covered and the last stone was placed. When they were done, she stood over the anonymous graves, her hands blistered and bleeding. She didn't cry. She just stared, her chest heaving. Back at the homestead, she scrubbed herself clean at the water pump, the icy water shocking against her hot skin. She scrubbed until her skin was raw. Elias waited on the porch, listening, knowing that some stains wouldn't wash off so easily. For weeks, a strange, uneasy calm settled over the ranch. The day-to-day rhythms returned. Anna moved with a new, hardened purpose, but the light laughter that had occasionally escaped her was gone. Some days, her eyes were clear and focused. Others, they were distant, seeing ghosts on the wind. Elias gave her space. But one morning, he found her sitting on the ridge, the same spot where she had once declared her need to make them afraid. Her boots were dusty, her hands folded in her lap. "They won't stop with him," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Men like that, they don't die alone. They have friends, brothers, others who think the same way." Elias sat beside her. "No," he agreed. "They don't." She turned her head, her eyes meeting his. They were clear, hard, and utterly resolved. "I don't want fear anymore," she whispered. "I want memory. I want them to know. I remember." Elias took a slow breath. "Then we find the others." She didn't look surprised, only grateful. "You'd help me?" "I started this," he said simply. "I won't let you finish it alone." The wind on the ridge was cold and steady. Elias's words, "Then we find the others," hung between them, not as a question, but as a pact. Anna closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind touch a part of her heart that had been locked away. When she opened them, something new lived in her gaze. Not fear, not anger, but a cold, clear resolve. Elias rode into town that same afternoon. The town of Cedar Ridge was a sparse collection of weathered buildings. He didn't linger. He went to the general store, buying boxes of rifle cartridges and tight coils of brass wire. He traded for a second, lighter pistol for Anna. His purchases were practical, but they sent a clear message. Elias Vance was preparing for war. His final stop was the telegraph office. He sent a short, coded message to an old Army contact. The reply came hours later. The telegraph operator handed him a single, folded slip of paper without meeting his eyes. Back at the homestead, Elias placed a small, dented tin box on the table between them. He opened the lid. Inside, on a stack of folded slips of paper, were names. names of men who walked free while others suffered. Anna reached out and picked up the top slip. She unfolded it. Her face showed no emotion, but her knuckles were white. She read the name, then set it down and picked up another. "I'm going to find them," she said, her voice flat and certain. It was not a boast. It was a fact. Elias nodded. "We'll start at first light." The following morning, they rode out as the sun crested the ridge. They were a stark picture against the dawn. The veteran on his Grullo mare, the German shepherd scouting ahead, and the woman, healed and hardened, on the blue roan stallion. They were no longer just a rescuer and the rescued. They were hunters. They rode west into harder, more broken country. Their first destination was a mining camp called Bitter Creek, a place the telegraph operator had circled. It was a long ride, through canyons where the shadows felt watchful, and across plains where the wind was the only thing that moved. They spoke little. They reached Bitter Creek after 3 days. It was a miserable collection of tents and shacks clinging to the side of a dusty hill. The air was thick with the sound of stamp mills and the smell of men who had forgotten civilization. Elias and Anna split up. He went to the saloon, a loud, rowdy place. She went to the general store. Elias sat at a corner table, a single glass of whiskey in front of him, his eyes and ears open. Anna traded a few coins for some dried apples. Her conversation with the shopkeeper's wife a masterclass in extracting information through shared understanding of cruelty. That evening, they compared notes by a small, hidden fire outside of camp. Elias had heard a name mentioned with a nervous laugh. Anna had a description, a man with a burned hand. The details matched one of the names in the box. "He's here," Elias said, staring at the lights of the camp below. "He works the night shift at the main shaft." Anna looked toward the mine. "Then we wait for his shift to end." They waited in the lee of a spoil heap, downwind from the mine shaft's entrance. The shift change was a noisy, chaotic affair. Rex let out a nearly inaudible woof. His body tensed. Elias followed the dog's gaze. A man was separating from the crowd, a hulking figure with a distinct, clumsy gait. As he passed under a lone lantern, the light glinted off the twisted, shiny flesh of his left hand. A burned hand. The man from the list. Hobbs. Hobbs didn't head toward the rowdy saloon. He shuffled toward a lone shack on the outskirts of the camp. Elias and Anna moved in sync, circling around through the shadows. They reached the shack just as Hobbs was fumbling with his key. "Looking for this?" Anna's voice was calm from the darkness beside the door. Hobbs spun around, his burned hand flying to the knife on his belt. But Elias was already behind him, the cold barrel of his pistol pressed against the man's spine. Inside, Elias commanded. They forced him into the single room of the shack, which stank of unwashed clothes and rot. Elias barred the door while Anna lit a lone lamp. Hobbs stood in the center of the room, his eyes wide, darting between them. "What do you want?" "My money?" "Take it." "We don't want your money," Anna said. She mentioned a name, a woman's name, a name from a past he thought was buried. Hobbs's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elias moved quickly, patting him down and removing his weapons. He shoved the man into a rickety chair. "We know what you did. We know you ran with Jed Holloway." The name Jed Holloway was the final key. Hobbs's shoulders slumped. He knew this wasn't a robbery. This was a reckoning. He started talking, his words tumbling out in a desperate river. He named other names, confirmed others on their list. Then he gave them what they needed, a location. A remote canyon where Jero's boss, a man named Silas, operated with a dozen hardened men. When he had told them everything, he looked up at Anna, his eyes pleading. I was just following orders. Jed, he made me." Anna's expression did not change. It was the same excuse Jero had used. She looked at Elias and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Elias moved behind Hobbs. The man began to sob, begging. There was a quick, sharp sound. Then silence. They left the shack as they had found it. Hobbs would be just another miner who'd skipped town. Now, they had their target, Silas, and they knew where to find him. They found Silas's camp in the remote canyon 2 weeks later. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Elias's planning and Anna's resolve made them an unstoppable force. When it was over, the network that had supported Jed Holloway was broken. The tin box was empty. The ride back to the homestead was quiet, but the silence between them had changed once more. It was no longer the silence of trauma or hunting, but of a shared burden being laid down. The homestead near Cedar Ridge was exactly as they had left it, yet entirely different. Weeds had grown in the garden and dust coated the windows, but it was still standing, a solid, silent promise of peace. They set about the work of reclaiming it, not as a fortress, but as a home. Anna replanted her garden, this time with flowers alongside the vegetables. Elias repaired the porch and built a new, stronger door, not to keep danger out, but to welcome comfort in. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge and painted the sky in shades of fire, Elias found Anna standing by the corral, watching the horses. The air was cool, and the wind carried the clean scent of pine. She had let her hair grow longer, and the last of the shadows had finally left her eyes. "It's quiet now," she said, without turning around. He came to stand beside her. "It is." She was silent for a moment, then she slowly reached out her hand. Elias looked at it, then at her. He took it. Her fingers were calloused and strong, and they laced with his without hesitation. It was the first time since the barn she had willingly, freely reached for another human being. The road behind them was paved with fire and blood, with graves and ghosts. It was a road that had forged them in a crucible of violence and survival. But the road ahead was different. It was made of early mornings feeding chickens, of shared meals by the fire, of watching the seasons change from the porch of their own home. It was a road of healing, slow and imperfect, but true. Danger had not vanished from the world. Memory had not faded. Elias still kept his rifle clean, and Anna still wore her pistol low on her hip. But life, stubborn and resilient, grew anyway. It grew in the garden she tended, in the trust between a man and a woman, and in the quiet understanding that some wounds never fully close, but they can stop defining you. They had started as rescuer and rescued, evolved into teacher and student, then into partners in vengeance. Now, they were simply Elias and Anna, two people who had walked through hell and found, on the other side, a reason to live.
If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.